we'll kick it off here since it's a couple minutes after 3:30. It's a Friday. It's a beautiful day. I don't want to keep people too long from getting outside and enjoying the nice weather. So thank you all for coming for the very last event of Earth Week. It's been a really, really fun week so far. And we're all really excited for this final event to kind of finish up the week. There are a lot of familiar faces that I'm seeing from past events this week, so you all get a gold sticker if you showed up to every single event. So we wanted to gather as many young people across the state today who are working on issues of climate change, who are generally environmental activists, or who just really, really are doing great things in their communities when it comes to sustainability. And we've all seen in the news Greta Thunberg, and over the last year, especially, young people have really been stepping up when it comes to fighting climate change. I think that's always been the case, but especially this last year, it's really been profound and amazing, the things that young people are doing, both on a national level and even down to the local level, like all of our panelists are doing here. So I'm not going to take up too much of their time. What we're going to do here for about the first half hour is we have some pre-made questions that we're going to go through with them. And then after that, we're going to open up audience questions, and you'll just want to type them into the chat. Kate is going to be keeping track of all of that and everything. So she'll make sure that your questions are being asked. And then we're going to wrap up at about 4:30 or so. So with that, I'm just gonna kick it off to our very first panelists. We're gonna have them introduce themselves. So the main things we just wanna hear from them: name, where they go to school right now, if they're going to school, what year they are, major, basically what brings them here today, what's been their expertise, or what have they been working on lately. So we're gonna start off with Brandon.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Byrne. I'm a senior in my last semester at UW Green Bay studying ecology and conservation biology. So a lot of my experience involves kind of ecological changes as a result of disturbances, namely climate change and other things like invasive species. I've worked with institutions like the Smithsonian, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and even UW Green Bay's own Conference Center for Biodiversity. So really excited to be here with all you guys and kind of give some insight from that standpoint.
Cool. All right. And next up, we've got Tressa.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if my resume is as elaborate as Brandon's just was, but I go to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I am in my first year of my senior year. I am double majoring in environmental geography and American Indian studies. And my focus on advocacy really is in Indigenous tribes and environmental justice for them, because I feel like they get overlooked a lot, and there's just a lot of issues there that shouldn't really be there. Yeah, that's where I'm gonna stop.
Okay, next in line is Emmy.
Hi everyone, my name's Emmy. I'm a senior at UW-Madison and I study environmental sciences and sociology. I'm also WCV's Environmental Justice Fellow, and my work on campus is with the Wisconsin Student Climate Action Coalition, or WSCAC, of UW-Madison, and my area of advocacy is also centered around environmental justice and really focusing racial justice in environmentalism.
Thanks, Emmy. May, you're up next.
Hi, I'm May. I go to the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. I'm currently a sophomore there. I'm an environmental policy and planning major. And then I guess what brings me here today is I wrote a resolution with another student getting the campus off. I mean, we're not off yet, but the resolution states that we'll be off carbon and fossil fuels and switching over to renewable energy. And then last semester, I was the author of a solar study for the university talking about the feasibility of getting off of coal and switching over to solar panels on campus.
Cool. Last but not least, Claire.
Hi, my name is Claire Westland. I'm a student at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay as well. I'm graduating in May, so that's pretty exciting. I am double majoring in democracy and justice studies and then also philosophy, and I'm planning on going on to law school for environmental law. Aside from school, I'm also the Clean Energy Fellow for the Wisconsin Conservation Voters. So a lot of my work has been focused on clean energy initiatives around Green Bay and then around Wisconsin as well. So I spend a lot of my time doing research and looking at what other schools are doing across across Wisconsin and see how we can implement those at UWGB and then also within Green Bay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I'll kick it over to you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here and for introducing yourself. We're going to start with our first question. What does climate and environmental advocacy mean to you, and how do issues of equity factor into your work? So we'll start with Brandon again.
All right, so admittedly, that is kind of out of my area of expertise. I'm not so much on, the advocacy front as I am kind of more so behind the scenes. But to me, at least, I see it as, showing people that it's kind of your civic duty, to be a good steward of the environment, and kind of show people that it's not some, crazy radical movement. It's really just kind of the bare minimum that we can do, as people for the environment.
Great, thank you. Tressa.
Yeah, I think environmental advocacy to me means a lot of things, but I guess the biggest one would be I'm fighting for all aspects of life, whether that's human health, clean water rights, clean air rights, control over what foods you have access to, whether that means buying them or growing them. It means fighting for a better future for my children and my children's children, so they get a chance to see all these beautiful landscapes and get a chance to learn from them, because it's a scary thought that one day a lot of these great mountaintops and stuff might not be covered with glaciers anymore. This also though means that I have to be very vulnerable and strong at the same time, because not a lot of people agree with me. Which can be a scary thought, but I know that it needs to be done. And someone has to do it, so I guess I'm willing to do it. And in terms of equity, I kind of thought about this for a while, but I think there's always the big debate. Everyone hears about equity and equality. And although equality is a great concept, I don't think it's where we need to go in terms of environmental activism, because when I think of specifically Indigenous tribes, there are things that they need. So equity comes into bigger play for this, because we don't need things that other governments or other sections of the United States needs. So I think in order to succeed, we need Indigenous tribes need to be given the resources and the support, which might be more or less than other people. So I think equity is a great kind of route to take when talking about environmental advocacy.
Great, thanks Tressa. Emmy?
I think I echo what Tressa said earlier. For me, environmental advocacy really means that I use my privileges and the opportunities that I have to help uplift those who are less fortunate, and to really make sure that not only is our earth taken care of, and not only do we switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but that we also focus on those people who have been most impacted by environmental degradation. And so for me, environmental advocacy and climate advocacy are very much intertwined, like you said, with the people and with the earth.
Great, thanks. And May?
I guess environmental advocacy for me, it's a little more simple. It's just basically no matter how much it gets fought. We're all part of a closed system. So what we do really impacts both our lives, our neighbors' lives, and every living creature on this earth. So really just being an advocate for the earth is very actually selfish, because it's taking care of ourselves and taking care of the health of where we live. And there isn't a plan B or a planet B, as they say. So we can't just count on going somewhere else, because there is nowhere else. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of this earth, and that we're taking care of our home to just live.
Cool, thanks. And Claire.
So bridging off of what Emmy and Tressa were talking about, Wisconsin conservation voters, we do focus a lot on inclusion and environmental justice. So environmental advocacy means to me is everybody having the same opportunities when it comes to clean water or trusting the air that you're breathing, and really allowing people to have or to live in a flourishing environment, and then not have those environmental health impacts. As far as clean energy, definitely trying to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to buy into those initiatives that want to, and then making sure that it's affordable and available for everyone who wants to do that.
Right. So we're going to move on to question 2, and feel free to also to pull from examples of your work, and if there's any like kind of concrete thing that you've done in your experience that like encapsulates these questions, feel free to explain that too. But so what kinds of responsibilities do you believe young people hold in terms of climate justice and environmental advocacy as a whole? And we'll start off with May this time.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, it's not just the responsibility of young people. I think everyone has the equal responsibility of taking care of climate justice and environmental advocacy issues. But I think young people are more prone to seeing these issues and wanting to do something about it, because we know that in the next 30, 40, 50 years, we'll be directly impacted by these issues. But I think it's important that as young people, we keep moving forward so that we can really spend the better part of our working career on these issues and seeing like real results when we're time to retire, I guess.
Cool. And I'm sorry, I actually made a mistake. We'll stick with the last order that we had, so we don't have to keep calling on all of you. So I believe with the last order, we actually went with Brandon was first, correct? So we'll get back to order. Brandon, you're up next.
Awesome. So I think, kind of like May said, quite a bit of it does fall on our shoulders. As she mentioned, the projections for the next 30 years by 2050 really are not promising, if we just kind of leave everything as a status quo. So I think for young people especially, so it's going to affect a very significant part of our lifetime. It's kind of up to us to kind of do the day-to-day things that we can to provide for the environment, provide, a better, just contribute better to, the carbon footprint per se. And lost my train of thought here. Yeah, just kind of with that, I mean, we're going to, experience the brunt of it. So it's really up to us to kind of do what we can to improve for the environment, but also kind of, teach the people around us that, these are the things, they're not crazy, they're not weird. It's really what's in store isn't good if we kind of keep where we're at. So these are the things that you can do to help, but also, get people in office that represent us. Not to take the whole, get too political with it, but you need people who represent people that kind of want to put, a greener earth on the map per se. So, yeah.
And yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with what Brandon and May just said. But I think what May said about how it's not just the youth, it's not just our responsibility, it should be everybody's responsibility. I think that's something really important that we don't really think about anymore, especially like in the media. you see all the time, like, the future is in our hands and it's the youth that's going to make all the changes, which is true. Like, the future is in our hands, and it is a lot of responsibility, and it's kind of a lot of pressure too to put on young people, because all of us are still in school, and I'm sure all of us on the panel feel the same way. Like, we just want change and we want it now, but we need to focus on getting our degrees first. But I definitely think young people show a lot of resiliency, especially when it comes to this climate movement. And I think that is something that is so amazing, and that I hope just like keeps going, and we keep being resilient and keep fighting, because there's a lot of people, especially older people, who don't really agree with what we're fighting for. But I definitely think it is a big part of our responsibility to fight for this planet.
Yeah, I echo what everyone has already said. I think that it's sort of unfair. I mean, it is unfair that this responsibility is so heavy and weighs on us so much. And then I also want to echo that it's not just our responsibility. And like what Brandon was saying, like, we do need representation in our local, state, and federal legislatures, especially because we're so young and we can't be there and representing ourselves right now. And I personally have been doing this work since I was 11. And I don't think that the amount of stress and pressure that I have had to endure is something that I want my children to have to endure. And so I do really think it's our generations right now who are sort of picking up the slack of our society's consumption.
So I mean, just adding to what everyone else is saying, I couldn't agree more with everybody. I mean, as far as our responsibilities as youth, I don't want to put too much pressure on us, but I do have a professor who calls us the age of resistance. And, you know, I think it is important that we hold our elected officials accountable for things that they're doing. And then not only that, but then learning from past experiences or methods and kind of adapting that into our future work. And then learning to admit when we were wrong. So, I mean, especially with my work, I mean, clean energy, it's a relatively newer concept within the last like 20 years or so. And I think we're going to keep seeing advancements, and they're going to look back at us and probably think that wind turbines are just like an age-old thing or Stone Age type technology. And I mean, as long as we have to keep moving forward on that, and we have to, we have to keep pushing back. I think that's really important. I mean, looking at the 50th anniversary of Earth Day that we celebrated on Wednesday, I mean, 50 years ago, they probably thought in like the 70s, like, oh, this is all going to be cleared up by the 90s. I mean, this is like an old thing, but I mean, we're still fighting it and we're still doing it. And I can't speak for everyone, but I don't want to be here in 20 years or 50 years later and still talking about the same things and not making any progress. So I hope to see that we have a lot more people in governments and states that go into clean energy and start really focusing on conservation and things like that.
Thanks, everyone. Definitely share a lot of the thoughts that were mentioned too. So our next question is, what kind of change are you working toward personally? And again, like Casey said, be as specific as you can in your specific work that you're working on. And what would you hope to see in the next 5 years, in the next 5 years? Are there any barriers that you see to future change? And we'll keep the same order, starting with Brandon, then Tressa, Emmy, May, and Claire.
Awesome. So I guess most of what I do, I've worked on projects, kind of as I mentioned, with the Smithsonian. And what that was doing was gauging forest response to climate change, kind of seeing how it affects the communities, how it might affect growth, and what have you. And kind of a lot of that, you know, other work that I've done with the Conference Center and with Fish and Wildlife is really, we can use that data to prepare for these changes that we're seeing in the future based on projections. And so kind of with that, I really want to see that kind of stuff being used, and hopefully that it's beneficial in our planning and in conservation. And in terms of, what I want to see in the next 5 years, there's been so many rollbacks, on environmental regulations, particularly on public land and kind of opening it up to use for, fossil fuels and energy and such. I don't know how feasible that is to kind of reinstate that all over the course of 5 years, but I would like to see, kind of the trend being set back, kind of putting all that stuff back in place, because not only are public lands, they're great for people for recreation to enjoy, but they also affect, lots of wildlife that live out there. Like, for example, you have in rangelands out west, like the greater sage grouse, some of you may be familiar with, is kind of an icon of Western wildlife. And these rollbacks on the public lands out there really have a great impact on that. When you're going for natural gas, oil, what have you, it really has a significant impact on their habitats. And so really, I want to see things kind of trend back the way they were. People start reinstating laws that take it seriously and kind of see us hit that point we were at and then progress beyond that.
Yeah, so I also thought about this question for a really long time, and it kind of made me feel a little bad and gave me a little bit of imposter syndrome being on this panel, because I am not currently working on like any projects, I guess. But when I was thinking about it, I guess right now, like my focus is getting an education, and getting my degree, because I am a woman of color, so therefore I am doubted a lot more, and not taken as serious unless I have that diploma. And I truly and strongly believe that education is one of the strongest tools a person can hold. So right now my main focus is getting my education, but I mean, I think something that can be just as meaningful is always just like talking the ears off of your friends and your family about environmental issues, or policies that are trying to be passed and stuff like that. Because the more they know, the more support hopefully that will branch out. But in terms of the next 5 years, I guess my plan after undergrad is to like take a little break from school, but I do see myself at the moment going back to possibly law school, specifically tribal policy, because I believe policy is super important, especially in this type of work. And a lot of indigenous tribes don't have the right amount. The US government has just done them really wrong in the past, and they don't have the access they should to their ancestral homelands, to do a lot of work and a lot of good work for the environment. So hopefully within the next 5 years, I can help them fight those injustices.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Tressa? Do you mind if I put you on the spot?
Go for it, Kate.
Okay. So I know Tressa, I live in Eau Claire, and she's a student at UW Eau Claire. And Tressa has a great story about her work to get her professors to integrate more traditional ecological knowledge into their curricula. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that and your work on the campus intertribal council.
Yeah, so I'm the president of the Intertribal Student Council at Eau Claire, and as I said before, I'm an environmental geography major, and I absolutely love the program. I love my professors. They're all super cool, but when I got to Eau Claire, I kind of noticed that there was just this huge gap, and like there was absolutely no like teachings of indigenous people or how they steward the land and how they take care of the land. And I just thought that was absolutely crazy, because indigenous people were the ones who taught the settlers how to take care of the land and live off of it when they came over here. So I just I don't know, I just thought it was insane. So this past year I was very fed up with it, and I took all my stacks of books that I have on traditional ecological knowledge. And for those of you who don't know what that is basically just like indigenous science, and how we like view and take care of the land, and like kind of our conservation work and stuff like that. because it's very different than Western science. But I took every stack of book that I had, or every book that I had in my room, and I walked through the geography department and I handed them out like candy. And I said, you all say you want to help me and like integrate these kinds of teachings, but you don't know how, and all of these books should help you in some way or another. And I got an email over winter break, this past winter break, and one of my professors said that she really appreciated me letting her lend me my book, and that she is now taking a chapter of that and teaching it to her class, or she was teaching it this spring. So yeah, it can be done. It's possible.
Sorry, I was taking all of that in. Thank you for doing that. That is amazing. So I guess for me, the past year or so, I've been doing two things. The first is environmental justice education. I've been making social justice workshops for UW-Madison for the past 2 years, and I've really sort of fine-tuned an environmental justice curriculum that I've been able to share with the broader UW-Madison student community and the Office of Sustainability there. And so that is one part of what I do. And then the second part of what I've been working on is the Wisconsin Student Climate Action Coalition. And for the past semester, we're a new organization. So we started last December in 2019. And this past semester, we've been doing a divestment campaign for UW-Madison. And so I think on that front, we faced a lot of barriers because the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association is a C3. So they're technically not the university. And so divestment discussions get really tricky and really political. So that's been something that I've been frustrated with and trying to work on with WisCAC and with students actually across Wisconsin at a lot of different UW system schools. And so in terms of that, in 5 years from now, I want to see us 100% off of fossil fuel investments and investing in renewable energy sources. And then, you know, if we're shooting big, I want, you know, an action plan for UW-Madison and the UW system to be 100% based on renewable energy.
I guess I'm gonna just talk about the 100% renewable energy just a little bit more. That's kind of where I've been focusing the last 2 years at UW Green Bay. So I guess when I got to Green Bay, there hadn't really been too much conversation about it. You know, there had been a lot of murmurings along the students and environmental clubs saying, yeah, that'd be really great. But then I linked with one other student. He's since graduated, Jace Hanneman, but he still reaches out to me and makes sure everything's going well. And when we started with going through the student government. And the thing that's really cool about student governments is that they speak for the entire student body. So we got the student government to pass it, which means the entire student body was technically behind becoming 100% carbon free through the use of solar panels on campus. But UW Green Bay wasn't the first ones to really start this. UW Stout has been working on a project very similar to ours. And I think they've started putting solar panels up. And if I'm not mistaken, UW-Madison, when I reached out to someone in Madison who was working on a similar project, and I know they were running into a lot of obstacles, which is very normal for a campaign like this. But there is a lot of work in the UW system, and I think UW Platteville, there's a couple other universities that are also having similar initiatives. So I wouldn't be surprised if it became a whole UW turnover in the next 5 to 10 years. That wouldn't surprise me at all, because there is a lot of movement from the students and a lot of staff that supports these kind of initiatives. So that's really one thing that I find super promising about that might happen over the next 5 years. And I guess the thing I would like to see more is just the education piece. I'm thinking about 5 years ago on where people stood with the environmental issues. It was definitely not as progressive as it is right now. So I think just continuing that education, and then like you guys were talking about, getting those environmental justice issues talked about in class. I know my professors, or one of my professors, she has now added on environmental justice books into her curriculum instead of just the typical law books, and really looking at different types of cases. Actually, today I just read a case on water rights and indigenous people in Montana, looking at the Milk River. But really just continuing education with getting a deeper understanding and educating people in a way that's not accusing them of being environmentally disruptive, because we're, I mean, as a species, we're resource heavy. So, I mean, it's not accusing people, but it's really just learning what's going on and how our actions have a very large consequence and a ripple effect. Yeah, I guess that's all I'm going to say about that.
All right, so this is like one of my favorite questions, so I'm going to try to keep it as short as I can. For personal goals, what I would like to see in the next 5 years, I'm really trying to cut down on like single-use plastic and focusing on composting and reusable containers and things like that. And cutting back on waste is like the hardest thing to do once you get into like the nitty-gritty of it. So I'd like to see more like local city involvement in that. I'm from Green Bay, so we're doing pretty good. We're definitely making the right moves towards like getting people what they need for composting and providing things with single-use plastic. As far as the work that I've been doing at WCV, as a clean energy fellow, as I mentioned earlier, my job literally was to research what other schools and municipalities are doing in terms of clean energy. So we're looking at like Dane County, who's 100%, and different schools. UW Stevens Point was within the last 6 months, I believe, went to 100%. So it's just like things like that. Like we're trying to adapt that into what we're doing. And like May said, I mean, May was definitely spearheading that project at UWGB. But I mean, continuing along with that too is, I mean, I would love to see widespread clean energy resolutions across the state. So the whole UW school adopting that would be incredible. More smaller communities and things like that, once the technology and capability is out there for them to buy into it, and just getting that community support to rally behind that idea is a big thing. So that's another thing that I did, was try to rally the troops and get everyone super excited about clean energy. And at UWGB, I was definitely a little spoiled because we do have a really good community, like student community, as far as being one of the eco-use schools and having a lot of people interested in environmental sustainability and conservation. So just continuing that increased college student engagement, but then also trying to pair with like elementary or middle school and high school level kids. I mean, really get everyone, as many people as we can, kind of behind the efforts that we're doing, and kind of create this new generation of environmental champions would be awesome. Kind of what May was saying too, I mean, as much as I would love to say, like within 5 years, I would love to see our country at 100%. It's just right now, I just don't see that as a possibility, but that's not to say in the next, 10, 15, we'll be able to get there. So kind of finding that sweet spot between people who are in those fossil fuel industries and getting them interested in like clean energy and renewable energy, and showing that there is this bridge between the two where we'll be able to create that intersection instead of just alienating people and pointing the finger and things like that for pipelines and spills and things like that. So I think that's really important, is focusing the conversation on we instead of you, and us instead of just like them and they. So that's something I would like to work on, is creating more of a inclusive conversation with everybody regardless of political backgrounds or backgrounds of any kind.
All right, thanks. So this is our last prepared question before we move into audience questions. I put it in the chat, but again, as a reminder, if questions are coming to you in the last few moments here, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll go in order through them. So to kind of sum up, what advice would you give to other young people who are thinking of taking up their own environmental or climate justice work?
So I guess I would say you have to want it, right? Kind of in the environmental sector as a whole, you kind of have to be prepared for a lot of pushback, some doubt from people that really, don't think it's that important of a science. And so, I would say get involved as much as you can. At a school like UW Green Bay, we're fortunate to have a lot of people kind of taking some green initiatives, but outside of school, you can, get involved with your communities. A lot of nature centers, for example, kind of going more, like kind of ecological standpoints and conservation. They do a lot of volunteer events where, people from the community can come and help clean up invasives, kind of help along with those restoration efforts, with stuff like the Wisconsin DNR. But I guess for anyone specific to like ecology and wildlife, for anyone, if you're considering going into it or someone who's considering going into it, it really, you have to want that too. Because I remember during my first campus tour, I met with the wildlife department head, and I asked him, what kind of careers do people pursue with this type of degree? And he looked me in the eye and he said, insurance agents, retail workers, and so forth. And so it's kind of, I don't think it's not emphasized enough. It's not something you're probably going to get, a solid 9-to-5 job with right outside of school, just with the degree and nothing else. You really do have to get involved and kind of pave your own way with it. It's a demanding field, but at the same time, not a day goes by that I'm not happy with, what I've decided to do. And I think a lot of other people would find that same gratification.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of what Brandon said about getting involved, I think that's super important, and taking every opportunity that you have, whether you think you're qualified or not. I am now an alum of a conservation program in California, and I applied absolutely having like no idea what I was getting myself into, and I definitely did not think I was qualified to be part of the program, but I got accepted and it was the best experience of my life. And I think another thing of advice I would give people is to find a support system, because it can be very draining at times and it can feel almost impossible, but having a support system, I now have 19 other students from around the country that I can lean on. And I think if I didn't have them at times, I would honestly just probably cry a lot more than I do. But also just don't give up, just keep fighting. And like Brandon said, people are gonna think that it's not worth it, the work that you're doing, but it definitely is. So just keeping a hard head.
I am going to repeat what Tressa just said. I think that the most important piece of advice that I can give to people who want to do climate action or climate justice work or activism work in general is to have that network of people, not only for whatever organization or campaign you're a part of, but also for yourself personally. So you can have someone to call at 2 a.m. crying if you need to, because like this work is really hard and it gets really personal and it gets really political. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to make sure that we and our children and our children's children all have an earth and an environment to grow up in that is clean and healthy.
Yeah, and I agree with everyone. I think the biggest thing is knowing that you're going to be faced with a lot of conflict, and there aren't going to be some fun meetings where people are going to look at you and they're going to tell you you're crazy, and they're going to tell you this is unrealistic, and they're going to tell you basically that they just want you to go away. And really hearing that a lot can get to you. So having that support system. And I know for me, I'm part of the Public Environmental Affairs Council on campus, and really it's just an environmental club where we all get together and we talk about environmental issues, and it's really just kind of a support system. And we do a lot of environmental cleanups and programs, and we do a lot of plastic film recycling, but just having that group of people that are all very like-minded on this issue is very important, because there's not a lot of people that share the same environmental views as most of us here on the council today. But just making sure that, you know, you develop that tough skin, and that it's not going to be easy, but it's rewarding, and it's worth it, and it's so worth it. And I think I want to go off what Brandon said with paving the way. How you said most people don't get a typical 9-to-5 job out of school, and you're totally right. And I think that's one really exciting thing for a lot of young people going into this, because there's a lot of really cool opportunities that aren't necessarily 9-to-5 jobs, but they're the Conservation Corps, the Peace Corps, internships with the Nature Conservancy, California wildfires management. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and they are hidden, but once you get into the field, your professors and whatnot really start opening up those avenues. So after college, normally finding those opportunities and then advancing more, you can really create like a cool life path, I guess. And I think that's one thing that if I was giving advice to someone, mentioning, because you're not going to live a typical life. You're not, you know, you're going to have to do some other things to fight for it. But in the end, I think it's going to be worth it.
So the first words of advice I could ever give someone is just make that leap. I mean, get involved, whether it's starting at like your local level with a local nonprofit such as Wisconsin Conservation Voters. I mean, dedicating a Saturday to a trash pickup, or, you know, volunteering to come to a lobby day where you lobby your legislators. Emmy and I had the awesome opportunity of going to Washington, D.C. this past summer, and Kate did too. And I mean, we got to look at like our federal level policy and kind of how we can make a difference in that. And sitting down and telling your story is so, so important. Even if you think that it's not as grand as other people's, I mean, just telling how you're being affected by something or why you want to change something is so powerful. It doesn't matter how old you are either. I mean, I started with WCV when I was 23. Emmy started at 11. I know we have Greta out there who was 15 and already out there with a sign. So, I mean, age it doesn't matter in environmental work, but I mean, you do have to know there is going to be a lot of pushback. Unfortunately, it has become a partisan issue. And I mean, we're really trying to break that partisan issue and trying to get it a non-political, as non-political as we can, I suppose, to a degree. But it is super important just to make that jump and kind of like what Tressa was saying, even if you think you're not qualified, not think I was qualified for this position. And I mean, it ended up being the most rewarding position I've ever taken. I've had the opportunity to speak to constituents around Wisconsin and building that network, I mean, nationwide, because when we went to DC, we met with people our own age that they're all fighting their own environmental issues. I mean, here in Wisconsin, we're looking at manure pollution and agriculture pollution. We have lead pipes, but I mean, you have people on the East Coast who they're dealing with terrible water quality and just carcinogens within their water and things like that. And we met some really cool people from Montana who are dealing with different issues in Butte with oil refining and stuff like that. So, I mean, once you build up that network, even if you think you're kind of alone, there are so many people out in the same position that you are that are willing to be in your corner and back you up for everything that you're doing. So I guess summing it down, I mean, the biggest thing is just get started. I mean, make that leap, get there, apply for everything and anything. If you're interested in it enough, I mean, go out and do it.
Great, thanks everyone. That's the end of our prepared questions. We do have a few questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions left that they'd like to be asked, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll try to get to them. We have about 15 minutes here for the panelists. Panelists, feel free to jump in. We won't keep the same order like we did for the prepared questions. You can just jump in if you have an answer to these questions. So the first one, it kind of is building off of what Claire just said. Somebody asked, what can we do to get conservative politicians to be taking environmental issues more seriously?
If I can jump in right away. As I was saying earlier, and what we really focus on at WCV is storytelling. Kind of work on that story of self and why this issue is important to you. I mean, it's one thing writing a letter and saying this is what I want and this is why I want it, but I mean, having that deep emotional connection to a waterway or a mountain or whatever it is. I mean, I grew up on the Bay of Green Bay my entire life, and I mean, I've seen it change colors from algae blooms and God knows what else, but I mean, focusing on why these issues are important to you, it's really hard to ignore that. I mean, it doesn't matter what political affiliation, it's really hard to ignore when someone is actually suffering from pollution or environmental degradation.
Sorry, I think going off of what Claire said, like our elected officials, I mean, they're there to serve the constituents, which are us. And I think everyone really has a passion for the environment, whether they realize it or not. I mean, hunters need a healthy environment if they want to hunt. Fishers want a healthy lakes, rivers, streams, if they want to fish. Landowners don't want to see their water in their wells become contaminated where they can't drink it. Really, it's an effect on all of us, and just getting people to realize that and then communicate that to legislators, and then just becoming a united front on this issue. I think whether you're Democratic, Republican, Independent, whatever you are with, these issues don't just limit themselves to certain people, and just recognizing that you might not be out there saving one thing, but there has to be one thing that you're concerned about, whether it's your water or your hunting or something, and then just making sure that you're protecting that thing, which will have a ripple effect on protecting the entire environment.
Kind of going off of that, we got another question from somebody. Does anybody have any specific success stories of working with people who might be not sharing our, who might be kind of on the opposite side when we're implementing environmentally friendly practices?
I'd like to chime in with this. So one of my best friends, actually, I don't know if they're in or not. If they are, Drew, I apologize. But you know, he was never really so upfront and in my face about it. But you know, we would talk, and he really was not on board with it at all. And so, really, with me, like what it took for him, and I feel like a lot of people too, they kind of see like the loudest supporters who really they might rub people the wrong way. And so what it took with them was really just having like just a sit down discussion, relaxed. Each party is free to speak as they will. And kind of after that, I think kind of the people he knew from his background too, they really weren't supportive. So he didn't really hear the other side of it. And so I think just kind of having a relaxed, welcoming conversation about it, and also kind of introducing like, well, here's how it affects you, because I think so many people see it. Oh well, here's where I live. I don't live on the coast. It won't affect me, and things like that. And so just kind of, those laid back, non-confrontational discussions, and just kind of showing how it affects them. What do they have to play or gain from it?
Yeah, I agree with Brandon. I mean, conversations, like I said, are so important. As far as successes, Wisconsin conservation voters, we are nonpartisan. So we do focus on working with both sides of the aisle when it comes to conservation issues or any type of campaign that we're working on. The Speaker's Task Force on Water Quality is a bipartisan committee, and we've seen a lot of the good things come out, not as much as we were hoping for, but I mean, they are making a bipartisan effort to allow people to be able to drink their water without fear and things like that. And I think, like what Brandon was saying, just having those conversations with people, I mean, avoiding aggressive and confrontational conversations are something that I learned very quickly do not work. I mean, you need to have kind of a softer approach to this, especially when you know you're going against someone who may not see eye to eye with you, and just kind of keeping that open-mindedness and having that kind of fluidity of conversation, just showing like what they can bring and what you offer and kind of merging those two aspects together.
Yeah, I experienced a lot of, when I was writing my solar study, I experienced a lot of people in the facilities or in the administration that were not in support of that paper, but I needed to work with those people in order to complete the paper. So really, I learned a lot about just respecting what Claire said, taking a softer approach and understanding their point of view, because for like facilities, like that's one more thing that they have to maintain, and that's just another burden basically on their job, where before they wouldn't have that. So I understand. So like doing that study really made me understand that, you know, it's going to personally affect their life by doing this, and then just taking that, accepting that and understanding it, and maybe not trying to, you know, force them to change their opinion, because no one's going to change their opinion through force. But then just having those calm conversations like what Brandon and Claire talked about.
All right, thank you. This is a question that we get a lot with Wisconsin conservation voters. Like Claire said, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we work on issues that are important to everyday people, no matter their party, right? But they do generate some political conversation. And so we actually have a panel coming up on May 13th at 6 o'clock to talk about how conservatives and liberals support clean energy differently. There was a study that came out by Yale recently that showed that across the board, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals support clean energy, but for different reasons. And so we have panelists speaking kind of from both points of view and talking about how we can get more collaboration between conservative and liberal Wisconsinites. So look out for an email from us about that. We'll also be on Facebook. So we have 5 minutes left. We've had a bunch of questions in the chat box. One that I thought was kind of interesting. One person requested Tressa's book list for traditional ecological knowledge. And so I'm wondering if all the panelists could go through a recommended book or resource, and we can start with Tressa with her favorite book on traditional ecological knowledge.
I have to, okay. Let me see. If I had to pick just one. Okay, I have two. The first one would be Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer, 2 ERs at the end. That one's super, super good. She's a professor in New York. She's Potawatomi, and she just kind of talks about how like different relationships with the environment and how like we need to take care of it. And she uses a lot of like life experiences throughout the book. And I think she does a really good job explaining these things that are relatable to everyone. That is personally my all-time favorite book. But the second one that I just came across, it just came out like within the last year. It is Indigenous Food Sovereignty in the United States. Sorry, I have like my stacks back there. But that one, there's tons of different authors. There's a lot of different activists that talk in that book about how important the environment is, and how like Indigenous people don't have access to their lands to be like to take care of it, or to like have ceremony, or like plant the foods that they need. So that one also is super, super good because there's tons of different point of views that are in the book.
I have one that's a little bit different. It's a fiction novel that I think is really accessible for a lot of people who either like magical realism or have younger children who are into reading, but not necessarily like you're not going to give them like a textbook or like something that's super science-based, but it's called Gun Island, and it's by, I apologize, I am going to mess up the name, but it's Amitav Ghosh, AMITAV GHOSH, and it is placed in sort of India and also a little bit of Bangladesh, I believe, and it's really good. I would recommend it. Oh, and it's about climate change. That I forgot that part. Oh my gosh. So it's talking about how all of these people experience, you know, racism, classism, but then how all of them have really real lived experiences of environmental degradation due to climate change. There we go.
And we will send out these book recommendations to everybody participating today. So look out for a follow-up email. And panelists, remember what your recommendations are so we can include them in an email later. Does anybody else have any recommendations?
Yeah, I have one. I read The Sixth Mass Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert when I was in high school, and it was really something that opened my eyes and made me understand the full extent to what climate change and what we're doing on Earth is affecting really everything. And it's a really great book, and it breaks down environmental issues chapters by chapter. So it'll talk about forests, and then rainforests, and oceans, and grasslands, and it really just puts, like, it's written in a manner that is fun to understand, but it's very data and heavy, I guess you want to say. And it's not exactly quite a light read, but it's very, I found it very inspiring because it opened my eyes to issues that I would have never known about. And I think it's one of the books that really kicked off my passion for taking care of the environment, because it was like, oh no, that really, that can't happen, like, kind of moment when I read the book. So Sixth Mass Extinction, that would be my recommendation.
So I guess I'd like to chime in. Maybe, you know, a few of us might have already read this, A Sand County Almanac. Kind of in ecology and whatnot, it's kind of regarded as our Bible, per se. It was written by Aldo Leopold, who was a professor at UW-Madison, actually, I believe back in like the 50s when he was. And it's just kind of a collection of his essays about, you know, the environment, the landscape, and whatnot. And it's kind of seen as what really started the conservation movement. I won't go too in depth just to kind of save time, but it's definitely worth checking out.
All right, so we will wrap it up there. It's 4:30. Like I said, we will send a follow-up email with all these resource recommendations. We also wanted to make you all aware that Wisconsin conservation voters back in March released the Wisconsin Clean Energy Toolkit. Our ask for everybody on this call is to learn about and discover what your school or city or county is doing to address climate change and to move towards a more clean energy based society. And so that Clean Energy Toolkit is meant for activists and local elected officials to use to implement policy to transition to clean energy. It can be found at WICleanEnergyToolkit.com. We'll include that in our follow-up email as well. So learn about what your municipality or your college is doing to address climate change. And if you don't think it's enough, please take that Clean Energy Toolkit and start your own local clean energy movement. Our second ask for you is an easy one. I'm going to assume everyone here is registered to vote and planning to vote in November, but the biggest thing that we can do in the short term to address climate change and transition to clean energy is to elect good people up and down the ticket in November. And so assuming that everyone here is voting, I want everyone to commit to getting 3 friends registered and have their absentee ballot requested in time for the November election. Also the August election. Yes, thank you. There's also an important election in the 7th CD in May. So if you're living in the 7th CD, make sure to vote then. Thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the beautiful day. Enjoy what nature has to give us. It's giving us a lot today. So thank you and have a good one.